decided the client did not want to take any market risk whatsoever. She was going to live off of some of the funds. We didn't know for how long. So we just basically laddered cashable GICs over a 5-year period into the segregated fund contract. Literally from the day that the money was deposited into the contract, we turned an almost $2 million estate into a $0 estate. And in that instance, if we forget about all the legal aspects and whatever else, that would have been a $30,000 probate bill.
Wake up, it's time to rise. Talking money with sharp insight. Jim and Ryan here to guide. Mastering the money ride. Saving stacks and planning dreams. Living large by honest means. Tune in now for the schemes. Breaking down financial themes. Money mindset every day.
Well, once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Money Mindset Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jim. And joining me today is my co-host, Ryan Genoe. Ryan, how are things today?
Good. After hosting last time, I guess we'll put you back in the hot seat of hosting, the main host. So
I have to admit, it felt kind of weird, but I also liked it too. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about segregated funds or seg funds. So we're really giving people more of an in-depth understanding of what they are, because I would say a majority of clients that I run into have never heard of the term seg funds or segregated funds. And it comes down to, obviously, the great marketing that happens on the banking institutions of just talking about mutual funds. So I guess we'll dig deeper into kind of the differences, and that it's great for some people. For some people, it's not necessarily a great option, but just we want people to hear both sides, that the way they can make a better decision, and then come talk to us about how it can be implemented as a strategy within their own journey or plan. So
if you're someone who doesn't really want to put your money into GICs, would like to potentially have the potential for a better rate of return, but you're really nervous about the markets, a segregated fund might be an option because of the guarantees behind it. If you are someone who is older, retired, and have additional assets that you'd like to pass on to your children, grandchildren from a legacy point of view, and you want to bypass the estate, a segregated fund may be an appropriate option. And if you're a business owner and you're looking to potentially protect your assets from creditors, then you might want to consider a segregated fund, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the one thing I will say, and Ryan, again, this is something that we always say to people, is we don't think that this solution is for everybody, right? There are advisors out there that you and I both know, and we hear it all the time, where they think like this is the best thing since sliced bread. Then you have other advisors who will sit there and shoot it down and say it's the absolute worst thing you could do, right? But you and I, again, we go back to the Miyagi balance, right? There's an appropriate an appropriate client for this solution. And we're going to talk about when it may or may not be appropriate, right?
Yep.
So what is the segregated fund? Why don't we start off with that?
Well, segregated funds are an insurance product. So mutual funds are sold by banks. Segregated funds are sold by insurance companies. And it's a combination of investment and the insurance features that people like within the insurance, or like a life insurance policy. So it is a contract between you and the institution providing it. Again, they offer potential protection against, as you said, downturns in the market by guaranteeing a portion of the invested amount at a maturity or death. And we'll talk a little bit about what those two things mean for people depending on their situation. And I guess that kind of, for the most part, sums up what a segregated fund it is. It's essentially a mutual fund sold by an insurance company, and we called it a segregated fund. So
yeah, and they're underwritten through the Insurance Act. That's why they're offered through insurance companies and not through the banks. And going back to one of your original comments, you had said, a lot of people just have never heard of a segregated fund. They don't know what it is. I come across that every single time, right? And I think one of the reasons is we've talked about in the past, with the bank, people are used to walking into a branch, at least the older generation, walking into the branch, speaking to a teller, then speaking to a personal banking officer, and they would say things like, I have some money that I'd like to invest. And of course, they put them through some kind of risk profile. And if the client comes out and says, I don't want to lose any of it, I want it to be guaranteed, and I wanted to ensure that my kids get the money, then the recommendation at the bank level has typically been, well, let's put it into a 5-year GIC because you can get the highest rate. And let's name your child as a joint owner on the GIC because when you pass away, then as a joint owner, they would automatically receive those funds and bypass the estate, which we now know is really no longer the case in most cases. And that changed back in 2018. The other thing that we've talked about that the bank will not do, or the employee at the bank wouldn't do, is say, you know what, I've heard of these great things called segregated funds, and they'll actually meet all of those requirements that you're looking for. So here's a phone number to one of the insurance companies. You should go over there and get that contract. That would never happen, right? And the insurance companies, we don't really have branches, right? You don't really look at a corner and see there's a big, huge insurance company branch where you can walk in and do your insurance purchases and investments and whatever else. You're typically dealing with agents, or now more virtual, right? So I think that's really one of the main reasons why a lot of people have never heard of a segregated fund. Now, I think one thing I do want people to know is I think that most people, when they hear of a segregated fund, they think it actually is, well, a mutual fund with some level of protection. That could be one of the investments within the contract, but we also use segregated fund contracts and we hold GICs in there. And we'll talk about why we would do that and how I've done that in the past with other clients too. Um, so let's talk about the capital protection component. How is the capital protected? Like in what scenario would the capital be protected in a segregated fund investment?
Well, again, they offer a number of guarantees, right? So, excuse me. So, when talking within segregated funds, you hear 75, 75, 75, 100, 100, 100. And that breaks down what the protection is on both the death benefit side and when the contract expires at the end. And usually those contracts are 10 and sometimes 15 years. You know, when people get into them, when we're planning, we plan that you're not going to be touching this money for a large. Doesn't mean you can't touch the money, but when you do, you lose some of those guarantees when it comes. So that's really the huge capital protection piece that people do like when we find it as a right strategy for them. Again, to be clear. So is again, business owners, I think, is one of the biggest ones that we talk to as a great option. Creditor protected, making sure they're keeping the funds safe for them for their future business or their hairs or whatever it is. I think that's one of the biggest things. Anything else for capital
Well,
protection?
yeah, I mean, let's kind of define it a little bit more for an individual. So you're right. There's the first 75 or the first 100, and then there's the second 75 or 100. So the first 75 or 100 represents that over a period of time, capital, or 75 would represent 75% of your original investment, would be guaranteed regardless of the market value of the contract. And then there's the 100, which represents, it would be 100% of your original capital. And they used to be 10 years. Now a lot of them are pushing 15. And you don't see many 100s anymore. You see more 75s. And the reason for that is, for these guarantees, you're paying for it. There is an increased management fee for these guarantees. So that's one of the knocks against segregated funds by mutual fund advisors, for example, because they can sit there and say, well, you're paying, 2.75 for the management fee, where my mutual fund equivalent only charges 2.5%. But then the rebuttal to that is, but your mutual fund doesn't guarantee anything, right? So if the guarantee is not important, then absolutely, I've said to people, then go into the mutual fund equivalent. But if you really want that guarantee, you need to pay a little bit more on the management fee, knowing that you're going to have that peace of mind. And I remember once upon a time I had a client of mine when I presented the segregated fund option when we had a 10-year guarantee in most contracts. And he looked at me and said, Jim, if you're not making me money in 10 years, then why am I working with you? And he had a valid point, right? I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. But then if you look at, for example, the S&P 500 from 1999 to 2011 or 12, if you were invested in the S&P 500 over that period of time, you'd still be down 15%, right? So if he was in a segregated fund contract, he would have been topped up to that 100% of the original investment. The second 75 or 100, and this is where, from an estate planning point of view, I find there's a lot more interest, is it protects your capital at death. So if you had a $100,000 balanced portfolio outside of a segregated fund contract where there's no guarantee, and we dealt with 2008 when the markets were down 35, 40%, and you passed away in 2008 and your 100,000 was now worth, let's call it $60,000. Well, your beneficiary in that environment on a mutual fund portfolio would have received the $60,000. Had that investment been held in a segregated fund contract, even though the value was $60,000, the insurance company would have paid out $100,000. They top it back up to your original investment. Or if the market value was higher than the guaranteed amount, they would pay the higher amount of the two, right? So, I recently had an example. I'm actually seeing a lot of these examples now with clients who are in their 70s. They're now thinking about legacy planning, selling their homes, having extra funds, extra assets. And they're coming to me saying, Jim, I have X amount of dollars. I don't think I need it, but I would like it for it to be liquid. I don't know if I really want to invest it because now I'm more concerned about preserving the capital, making sure that if I don't use it, that can get passed on to my kids and grandkids. What option outside of a GIC do you have? And that's where I step in and say, in that situation, a segregated fund contract is perfect because you can invest in a portfolio for that potentially better rate of return, knowing full well that if you pass away and it's a bad year, the insurance company is going to top it up anyway, right? So you don't lose anything out of that. So am I missing anything there? Is there anything I need to add to that?
I guess no, not for the protection piece. I think we're going to eventually mention it too. Is that in some segregated funds, my brain just went blank for a second, but there's a point where every year there's a kind of a reset. So if the market actually doing better, then so you put in 100,000 and the market does well, and it's 120,000, it will lock in at the 120,000 resets, I believe. I think
They
it's
are they
just
are
some.
resets, and the resets can apply to the maturity guarantee. So that first number out of the two, right, the first 100 or 75, there's also a potential for a death benefit guarantee reset as well. We're not going to get into the mechanics of how it all works because there's a much smarter people than us that know how to calculate all that. The bottom line is that there is the potential to lock in future growth in maturity or at death. And the insurance companies, most of them, they just do it automatically. Some of them will actually have it preset, like once a year or X amount of times throughout the year. Some have it set where it's every 2 or 3 years. Some will allow up to 10 resets over the life of the contract. So again, this is where you really need to, I wouldn't say do your research, speak to advisors like Ryan and I, who are life insurance licensed, who can provide you with the information. But absolutely, there is some lock-in benefit that's available for sure. Right. So probate is another one. Now, we can't guarantee probate avoidance, but I would say in most cases, if you have your investment held in a segregated fund contract, and we're gonna talk specifically about a non-registered account. What I mean by a non-registered is an RSP, RIF, a TFSA, LIRA. Those are considered registered accounts. And there was a point in time where even if you named a beneficiary on those registered accounts at the bank level, they still didn't bypass the estate. But that changed. So now, if you hold an investment where you can name a beneficiary, regardless if it's at the bank level or at the insurance company level. Those funds will, in most cases, bypass the estate and get paid out directly to your beneficiary. Where there's a challenge is on the non-registered side. So this is your non-registered cash component, right? And where we see a lot of this is, again, older clients who sell their homes, and all of a sudden they're coming in with $1 million plus, and they can't put it into a TFSA or the registered accounts. It's literally exposed, and they don't really need to live off of it, or they might need some of it. But really, what their goal is, they want to pass it on again to the next generation. If you have it at an investment company or at the bank, you cannot name a beneficiary on those non-registered investments. No longer adding a joint owner guarantees that it'll bypass the estate. So what people do now is we place those investments in a segregated fund contract, because on a segregated fund contract, non-registered, you can name beneficiaries, which then bypasses the estate at death.
And that's estate planning efficiency right there, right? So for anybody looking for a way to have a smoother transition from upon your passing to their loved ones, and really in the years that I've been doing it, only recently I've been really started layering in segregated funds, and on the occasions that I compare clients that upon their death and having to support their families through that, the time that it takes for people to go through the process, go through the banks, get the money at a bank level, I want to say the fastest I've ever seen is 4 months. And I've seen people go as long as 2.5 years. I'm only saying as long as 2.5 years because it's still going on 2.5 years later. But on the protection side with a segregated fund, fastest I've seen the money get transferred to the benefactors is like 5 days, 4 or 5 days. I've also seen as long as, so far, I think 10 business days, which is still, in my experience so far, is really efficient and very quick, especially as the family is trying to gather other family members and you're dealing with all the other stuff that you're trying to deal with when somebody passes, which just takes a lot of the stress off and allows us to kind of free up and do our jobs and helping that person plan for the next stages of their life. So I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add as far as like your history or horror stories when dealing with either solution.
Well,
So
I think on the horror story side, I've heard other advisors who are not insurance licensed, and full disclosure, we are licensed to offer insurance solutions, but we also have referral agreements for non-insurance based products. So there isn't a bias in terms of our recommendations. It is basically based on what are your concerns and how do we try to fulfill those obligations in the best possible way. So I have seen situations where we'll call it $1 million estate, and a non-licensed advisor would say, "Well, that's only $15,000." Because 1.5% of the estate. Well, it's not just on the investment account; it's on total assets. So if you include principal residence, you include whatever other assets, it could be that much more. But it's not just the probate fee; it is the legal fees in going through the probate process. It keeps to your point, like I've seen right now, I believe in the GTA area, and we asked Sonia this question, who's a lawyer at TVH Legal. She said right now it's about 9 months to complete the probating process in the GTA. So what that means is for 9 months, everything's frozen. You really can't disperse. If you do and you're the executor and there's a shortfall, you're now financially responsible and liable for that shortfall. And the estate is open, so it's a live open record, so anyone can find out if there is an estate, who's getting what, and potentially make a claim against that estate. And I've had clients in the past who they thought, no, I have no other siblings, like this is clear and I should be getting my money right away, and all of a sudden some a relative that they thought had passed away is all of a sudden staking a claim on the estate. And I've seen that happen. And it's delayed it further by another 2 or 3 months until they resolve it. And even though ultimately there was no right to the estate, it still further delayed things, right? Now, on the flip side, I know you'd said that 5 business days, 10 business days, like usually as long as you receive, the insurance company receives the death certificate and the claimant statement within 5 to 10 business days, on average, is when they will disperse the funds. Now, I'm currently dealing with a claim that's taken longer. Part of it is because there are multiple beneficiaries, I believe like over a dozen. Some are outside of the country. It's a large sum. So it is taking longer than normal, but I would say in most cases, depending on the account size and the insurance company you're dealing with and the level or the amount of beneficiaries associated with the claim, you're right, about 5 to 10 business days. It's fairly quick, right?
And something that you kind of touched upon, but I wanted to add too, which is, you know, when it comes to the passing of somebody, often everything is public for people can see. So, especially in the reading of a will, this is another really big estate planning benefit, which is the confidentiality of it. So, upon the passing, when you assign beneficiaries, the information is confident, so it's withheld from the total estate as a whole. So again, situations that people set up for these is, often you have, one or two kids or somebody else that you want to give money to without the rest of the family knowing about. It's a great way for you to make sure that certain amounts go to the people that you want it to go without it being public for everybody else to know. And again, we all understand there's interesting dynamics when it comes to families, but it is a great way for that person to actually have the money go to the people that they want to or the places they want to for confidentiality. And again, we've talked many times about wills being very easily accessible once somebody passes, for the low price of $29.95, I think, or something like that. It's probably a little bit more than that, but it's a real important point that a lot of people like to hear when it comes to setting up the estate, and especially when it comes to segregated funds,
Mm.
offering that confidentiality for themselves.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I've received phone calls on from beneficiaries of a segregated fund contract, and they would call my office and speak to me and say, you know what, I was just informed by the executor that I'm a beneficiary listed on this investment contract. Can you tell me who else is on there? Can you tell me, is my brother listed? And can you tell me what other people are getting and who the other beneficiaries are? We can't. We have to go back and say to them, you need to go back to the executor, and it's up to them if they want to disclose that information, but we cannot disclose that information. It is private, right? So it is a way for someone to pass on those assets without upsetting individuals because maybe they believe that one should get more than the other for whatever reason. But through a will, it's read, it's public, and none of that is hidden, right? So that definitely is one of the aspects. And I remember again working on a case where similar situation that I talked about, but this is a real situation where the individual sold her home and came into well over $1 million, I believe close to $2 million, and they were going to go and put in a GIC as per the institution that they had been banking with for many years, and they were told that they can put in a GIC and name the one daughter as beneficiary, and the estate wouldn't be an issue. And again, we confirmed that that wasn't the case. So we placed all the money. The client did not want to take any market risk whatsoever. She was going to live off of some of the funds. We didn't know for how long. So we just basically laddered cashable GICs over a 5 year period into the segregated fund contract. Literally from the day that the money was deposited into the contract, we turned an almost $2 million estate into a $0 estate. And in that instance, if we forget about all the legal aspects and whatever else, That would have been a $30,000 probate bill, and we basically saved the beneficiaries $30,000, not by investing into something that had a higher management fee. I'm just talking about cashable GICs, right? So we saved them the $30,000. Like, why, if that's an option, wouldn't you want to have your funds saved, money saved? Why
Yeah.
give it to the government, right?
thirty
So
thousand dollars goes a long way for people in achieving their next generation of goals, right?
it does. It does.
So
So we talked, I think we kind of touched on the creditor protection. I don't really want to get too deep into this one because there are different scenarios where it may or may not be protected from creditors. And what I would say is that in most cases, if you invested in a segregated fund contract and you've named a beneficiary on the contract and you've owned it for a little over 2 years at minimum, typically, not always, not in every situation, but typically, those assets would be protected from creditors. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a business owner; it could be personal creditor protection as well, right? But I would say, um, if you like more information, then seek either a bankruptcy lawyer to ask for their advice. Because if you're in the path of bankruptcy and you put a whole bunch of money into segregated funds and a beneficiary, I can tell you that in that instance, those funds aren't protected, right? Because the courts will deem that you did that just to avoid paying the creditors, right? So that is a potential benefit as well of segregated fund contracts and life insurance policies that build cash values as well. So, anything else that we should kind of discuss around segregated funds?
again, segregated funds offer the kind of the same diversification you can with a mutual fund. So very similar. There can be some, in some cases, again, we would bring on, for instance, ourselves, Dave, we'd bring Dave, our tax expert, in to talk about certain tax advantages for people. Again, we don't want to go down a route without having that person to talk about them. But again, that ability to reduce some tax liability is always helpful. And then I think I know we have, and again, with some segregated funds, we can create, and we often do create some sort of layer for some people is some sort of guaranteed income, which is offered through the segregated fund piece too.
That is an option too, right?
Yeah.
So for people who are looking for guaranteed income, they still want to have that mutual fund style of portfolio, but they want a worst case scenario. If everything blew up, that they're guaranteed a certain level of income. There is a segregated fund contract currently in the market that offers those guarantees. So that's something again that we could share more information on if you're curious about it. So at this point, I think Ryan, that's pretty much what segregated funds. They're not sexy. They're not exciting. We're not here going to flash and say, yeah, they're the greatest things out there. They are great for certain situations. There's nothing else that compares. But are they for everybody? Absolutely not. However, what I would encourage you to do if you are sitting with someone at the bank and they're talking poorly about segregated funds, if you're dealing with someone who is just strictly mutual fund licensed, who is not registered to offer segregated funds, asking the questions. Do I get credit protection if it's important to you? Do I get some kind of maturity guarantee? Is there some kind of death benefit guarantee? I will say that death benefit guarantee is probably one of the most important guarantees because I referenced 2008, but man, do we have so many examples. This year is a wonderful year, as an example, right, with all the volatility in the market. Now, if you're someone in a segregated fund contract and you want to make sure that your beneficiaries get every single dollar you put into it, and you still want to take advantage of the market downturn and some of the volatility, that's a great program to get into, right? Because it gives you that peace of mind. So I think we're going to wrap it up here, Ryan. But I would encourage people, if you are looking for more information, you can find us at tvhfinancial.ca. There is currently a blog post posted on segregated funds, so you can look that up. We will be sending that out as well by the end of the week, and we are going to obviously post this on YouTube and all the various podcast outlets that are out there. And we're going to be on social media. And obviously, if you want to give us a call, you can find us on the phone, 647-727-4668. Ryan, once again, really appreciate your time. I think this is a great topic, even though it's not exciting. And looking forward to our next episode.
Yes, that's right.
Alrighty, take care.
All right, take care.
Why is it me? Why am I a guy? I still buy low, we still sell